Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, those of you who are with us face-to-face and those of you who are online. Glad to have you also. What I want to do is introduce our speaker for today and then move out of the way because you're in for a delightful presentation, knowing her for a little bit of time. We have Christina Schwabel, who's a sciences and computer librarian here at for University Libraries. She's been academic librarian for 11 years, and she earned her MLS from Indiana University and MS from Information Technology from Loyola University in Chicago. And of course, in getting to know her, there's many other wonderful things to say about her, but I don't want to use her presentation time. So I'm going to give it to her and invite you to get as much as you possibly can. Those of you online, we will seek to involve you as much as we can also. Those of you who are here, because we now have the fancy technology to do so, if you have like responses that you're giving to Christina or maybe answering questions, if you would speak into the device that's at your table so that everyone can hear you clearly, we will appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. Christina, welcome.
Thank you. I think I have a mic. All right. Good morning, everyone. As was mentioned, my name is Christina Schwabel, and this is You Are Not Paranoid, They Are Watching. So we're going to be talking a little bit about privacy and security in the classroom and beyond today. All right. So I guess I should do this. So who am I? As was mentioned, I'm an academic librarian. I've been a librarian for over 11 years now. I'm also a teacher. And I will say I'm not a lawyer, so I always should say that disclaimer anytime you're talking about privacy and security and things like that. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not necessarily an expert. I have not written tons and tons of papers on this. What I am is I'm a concerned professor and librarian who sees a lot of times that we're not necessarily having some discussions. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of bring this up and just start a little bit of a discussion on it. All right, so let's pull back the curtain a little bit. And let's talk about privacy, security, and data in the classroom. So what are some of the problems? All right, well, these are just for the last week. These are just some of the news things that have been reported. Again, this is just in the last week. As far as with data, security, privacy issues. So a few things that are a little concerning, right? And again, that's just 1 week. And we're also looking at data breaches. So the dark gray are the ones that are educational breaches. And it's reported, so these are just reported ones by entity, and it's estimated that there's 3/4 of breaches actually go unreported, which is a little concerning, right? So if you have this many things that are being reported, how many aren't? All right. So the number of significant breaches topped 1,300 in 2017. And that's fewer than 200 in 2005. So just something to think about. Now, EDUCAUSE published this nice, oh, and I'm going to have the slides posted later, so I'll have a URL for you guys, so you don't necessarily have to worry about jotting down every single thing. I like to make sure I mention that, sorry. So EDUCAUSE published this white paper talking about technology. So it's privacy considerations in cloud-based teaching and learning environments. And this is just showing some of the different things that we're needing to be aware of. So as professors, a lot of us are having where we're requiring students to use various different technologies. So this is just a few things. You might have blogs, photo sharing websites. I mean, most of us are going to have where they're having to use Microsoft Office 365 and some of the basic ones. But we sometimes have additional ones we're requiring. So we're having these ones, and as professors, we're having to juggle things such as class requirements, time, what technology is available and can I even use, and then also looking at the law and legal requirements. So that's a lot on our plate, right? So we also have to keep in mind, as we're doing all of this, that if we're requiring students to use technology, we need to think about what their rights are as it pertains to that technology, right? Because we're dictating that they have to use specific things. So, your turn. All right, what kind of technologies are you guys currently using in the classroom?
Blackboard.
Blackboard? All right. What are some other ones? Which one? PowerPoints?
What
Okay.
Microsoft was.
Wonderful. Are you guys requiring anything else?
I use like YouTube clips and things like that between classes.
Okay, YouTube. All right. So those are all pretty normal. Is anyone having them do anything with like wikis or blogs or having to go on any other site?
I've had students create Instagrams in the past.
Okay, create Instagrams or do some other ones. All right, so there's a few options. And you may not be doing as many ones that are a little more esoteric. You might just be using the normal ones. But it's just starting to look at when you're using those technologies, what are some of the different concerns that you might have or that maybe you should be thinking of when you're starting to use those technologies. All right. So these ones are like what data is being collected, who is being given access, or is that being sold, or who is it being sold to? Can you opt out of this? How anonymous is it? How secure is the technology? Can you actually trust that it's going to be secure or not? And then also, are any intellectual property rights being given away or forfeited? Now, are there other concerns that you guys have when you're starting to think about technology, or kind of what brought you to this presentation? Or is pretty much all up there?
Issue of data.
Up there? Okay, yeah. All right. So we're going to go ahead and look at a few things as far as some of these concerns. So data collection. All right, this is a huge thing. You're wanting to look at what exactly are you collecting? So you want to think about what information are you providing, who might be collecting it, what might they be reusing it for, and then you also just want to generally see kind of things. Is it something that you're going to need to log into? So how are you accessing the information, and what exactly are you asking the students to provide or to put up for the data collection? Now, a good way to trial some of that is privacy policies. So they can be really helpful in determining some of the information as far as who they're sharing information with, what kind of data they're collecting, what they consider personal identified information, other things like that. Unfortunately, they can be very difficult to read. So there was a study done in 2008 that's actually looking at the average word length, or sorry, not the average word, the average length for privacy policies. And they're saying most of them are over 2,500 words. And there's over 1,000 ones that you might be expected to read on a yearly basis. So anything from your email to if you're adding a new app to anything else like that, those are all different privacy policies. And there are a bunch of them. So it's estimated that if you are to read all the privacy policies that you were given within a year, it would take you over 154 hours per year. So you'd be spending almost 8 full work days in order to read all the privacy policies. And that's just to read them. That's not necessarily to understand them. There's a big difference too, because everyone can read them, but then once you've read it, do you actually understand what they're talking about? Kind of, maybe, sort of. All right. So there's a few tricks that you can do. So how exactly can you read a privacy policy? Now, what you want to look at normally with privacy policies, again, is it being shared for a secondary purpose? So what exactly is there sharing? And does it specify? So if it says that they're going to be delivering it to third parties, that's something to look out for, especially if it's going to say that they're giving it for delivering ads or other marketing. That's another big thing that you can look at. So anything where it's mentioning third parties, kind of a flag sometimes. Then you also want to see what explicitly might they be sharing. So sometimes they might mention, oh, we'll only share this part with this group and this part with this group. And so you want to kind of suss out and say what exactly pieces might be shared with what groups. You also want to look at what the terms for sharing are with government and local law enforcement. So we actually have certain laws and regulations and other policies, and sometimes they have to adhere to those. Sometimes they don't. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the policies a little bit later. And then you also want to look at, is it protected in all phases of collection and storage? So you could say, well, sure, we're going to protect your data when we get it, but is it being protected when it's in transit? What kind of policies do they have for their employers as far as security, as far as maybe they shouldn't leave laptops out that have information? Because I know that some of the breaches have happened where people had their laptops stolen and they didn't have it encrypted, and so people were able to get into that information. So you want to look at some of that as far as the data protection information. You also want to look at data retention. So not only are they collecting it, but how long are they keeping it? So some places they're going to say, well, we'll delete it within a certain amount of time. Or some places they'll say, well, you can request us to delete it. And then other places they pretty much say, well, sorry, we're just going to keep it forever. So it's important to know what kind of data retention it has. You also want to see, can you build this, or can you access their materials without maybe necessarily logging in? Do you have to give up that, or do you have to create a profile for that? So what is that allowed for there? And then you want to look at their definitions, because different sites will define things differently. So you might think, okay, I determine my personal identification information might be my name, my email, my phone number, my address. Maybe there's specific numbers or other things like that. But there might be some other ones where maybe their definition doesn't include some of those. So you want to kind of look at what definitions are available. And then you also want to see, do they have to notify you with any changes? So something that's recently been a problem is there'll be a big change to their privacy policy, and their version of notifying you is they might have a little banner at the top of their heading saying, we've changed things. Has anyone ever clicked on that and actually looked at the privacy policy to see what's changed? Okay, wonderful. But mostly it's just, okay, fine, just give me the information. I just need to get this done, or I have a test in 3 minutes and I really need to review this. Most of the time you're not really looking at that, all right? So when you're looking at those privacy policies, a good thing to do is start looking at some of the keywords. So a few different keywords you can search for, and most of the time you can just search by hitting, I want to say Control F for find, or of course with Macs it's going to be different. And so you can search for email, marketing, arbitration, waive or waiver to try to see what's available for that. Third party is a big one. For affiliates, and you can look for both with or without the S, and then also for opt-out. So these ones are good to search, and that's also good to know when you're searching. Sometimes you're going to have to actually go through the document and click open all the individual components first before it'll search it properly. So they don't like making it easy for you to search. All right, so let's venture into a few different examples. So I went ahead and picked out a few ones that are more commonly used right now within the educational world. All right, so we have Blackboard. So I have privacy policy. I just picked out 3 different pieces. So in this case, they're not necessarily telling some of the information because they're going to say, well, it's based off of your institution and whether your institution is decided. But I'll tell you this, I cannot find what our institution has decided as far as our privacy policy on Blackboard. So you would actually have to contact someone within IT in order to figure out what that usage is. So again, it's another layer, another bit that you're going to have to track down if you want to find that. So you have to read there. And I do have some statements that I found for the university, but nothing specific for that. And then it says who they're going to share it with. So they have it within Blackboard, within your institution, and they do have it outside of Blackboard. So you can look at that for third-party tools or products. And then it says these will have access to some of your personal information. So what you have to do then is any third-party tool or add-in you add, then you're going to have to look up their privacy information as well. Because Blackboard's not going to tell you that. They're just going to give this overarching statement saying they may have access to some stuff and you should check it out. They also have something, so this is another big thing to look at, is de-identifying information. So what happens is a lot of companies say, well, once we de-identify the information, we can then share it. We're going to remove things like your name and your phone number and your address. But it's actually been proven that a lot of times you can still figure out who someone is based off of de-identified information. So that's another thing to look at when you're looking at policies, is try to see what exactly they're going to remove if it tells that, or what they might share once it is removed. All right, top hat. So they can share your personal information with service providers, blah, blah, blah. You can also withdraw your consent for the use of personal information. So it has that. But, however, there are some additional terms and other phrases in there that do make it difficult, and they are going to retain some information for auditing or archival purposes. So even though you can opt out and you can get information removed, once you cancel and close your account, they're still going to have some for archival information, and it does not tell you how long they're going to keep it or what they're going to do it or how they're storing it. Then you have iClicker. So iClicker has, I pulled up their privacy notice and also their terms of agreement. So that's another one to look at, is your terms of agreement when you're using a specific product, because sometimes they'll have additional information in there. So they're going to have some things, again, where you allow them to use, repurpose, publish, display, all these appear. So you're giving up different rights with every single one you're looking at. And so that's one of those things, is when you're considering this as professors, you need to consider what rights you're able to give up for your students, or if there are rights you want to make sure you're not giving up, or maybe allowing the students to have a choice in. So all of these ones, too, I should mention, have been kind of vetted by the university. So just like Outlook is actually the one that's been vetted. And so a lot of these have been looked at a little bit more, so it's just good to keep in mind. And that's why once you start using additional technologies or apps or products, you want to start thinking about these different resources. All right. Now, there are additional resources put out actually by the institution, by the state. Federally, examples are such as this. So we have the USC Privacy Policy, which you can find here. And this is going to be talking about different advertising or other content. And so it's pretty much saying they all have their own privacy policies, and you need to look at those. So if you go back and forth with this in Blackboard, you can go ping pong all day with trying to figure out what the actual policy is. So that's one of the ones for USC. The Division of Information Technology also has a data policy that's available that pretty much is just referring to the State of South Carolina Data Protection and Privacy Policy. So again, it's going back and forth. And actually, the one that's online is outdated, so I found a 2018 version. So they have updated that. It looks like we just haven't updated our website yet. All right, then the South Carolina Department of Education also has its own. So they have some privacy legal options, and they also have some ones for data security and privacy available. And then the U.S. Department of Education resources, they have some really good ones in there. So they have one on protecting student privacy while using online educational services. So I'll go ahead and actually show you that one. They also have just requirements and best practices. So these are some good resources that you can start looking at when you're trying to determine what technologies you're wanting to use in the class, and maybe modeling how you're going to pick which ones, or what, as a minimum, it has to tell you before you want to use it in the classroom. So this is just a checklist for how to evaluate terms and service agreements to say, are they going to do something or not? And so it's kind of almost like you might see when you're giving a rubric, right? So it's going to say good, warning, maybe not so good, and then a little explanation about that. So this is kind of one that you can use as a cheat sheet. That'll say, is it something that you might want to look at a little closer? And again, these slides will be shared, so you can access that. Now, there are also some laws and legal issues that you need to keep in mind as you're looking at things. So one of the big ones is FERPA. Now, do any of you guys, I'm sure you guys have heard of FERPA. All right, so what is your understanding of how FERPA would be involved then with technology? If anyone wants to venture.
Just sharing grades with people that shouldn't have that information.
Yeah, so sharing grades. So the interesting thing is, so you're looking at the personal identified information from records. You're also looking at what exactly is an educational record. And I've seen at least 15 different definitions of what exactly constitutes an educational record. And I was not able to find a definitive one. So I think especially with the move into things that are more like, well, now, if you're making them record a video in class, is that going to be part of their educational record? What kind of things are they going to be including that's going to go on forever? And so you need to start thinking about that. And so there's a few things with do or don't. And it does mention don't use educational technology programs that your school doesn't have a contract for. And I think nowadays it's almost impossible to do, right? Because you're gonna, I doubt the university has a contract with Google, right? Is there any way that you're not using Google at some point in your class? So it's just, you can't expect that nowadays. There's so many technologies and so many resources that you're just going to be using, and you don't even think about it anymore, right? You just, I'm just gonna search for this, I'm just gonna pull these images and I'm gonna go to YouTube and show these videos. And so it's just become such a common thing that you can't stop and say, wait, I need to examine for every single instance what we're gonna be doing. And that's why we need to start thinking about it ahead of time and think about what am I typically using? What am I gonna be looking at? And how important is it? Is it something where they can delete the cookies and clear it and it'll be fine? Or is it something where it's maybe a bigger problem that I need to consider a little bit more? Sit down. Now, there was in September 1st, I'm sorry, I'm going to read this because I can't remember it that much. There was an opinion letter to the American Library Association by Leroy Rooker, the director of the Family Policy Compliance Officer, who's saying that any written examination or paper that is prepared by a student that reveals or discloses a student identity would be considered an education record. So that is under ordinary circumstances, FERPA prevents an institution from disclosing or publishing a student's written examinations or paper without prior written consent, except in accordance with blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty much just, again, saying that's considered educational record. So just thinking about what we're posting, are we having them create YouTube videos? Are we having them create something that's maybe it's going to be just in Blackboard, maybe it's going to be beyond. Are we using the third-party tools? Have any of you guys ever used any of those third-party tools in Blackboard? They have things like VoiceThread, or they have some of those other ones that are available. No? All right. Well, and also the turn it in, because anytime you're doing the turn it in, you're submitting their papers to the educational record. Now, I don't necessarily think we probably need to worry as much about turn it in as far as policy or privacy, but that's one of those things is what if that's then something that they want to publish a journal on? So then is that going to come back and say, well, are you going to be accused of self-plagiarizing? Because that's actually happened before where someone was accused of self-plagiarizing because they'd previously written another paper on it. And someone just ran it through and it came up with like 45% because it was their own work. And so just starting to look at some of those things and then seeing what exactly might apply to FERPA or just what do we want to be more cognizant of. And this is just too because security problems are not going away. So even the most secure ones in the world, which I will say most technology is not secure, they're going to at some point have an issue. So Blackboard has had a number of issues as far as the security. Outlook, actually there's a huge data breach that just happened with a bunch of usernames and passwords, so you might want to double check your passwords and change those. I think they had over hold on. I want to get the exact numbers, I'm not telling you. 773 million records were included in the latest data breach, and they're estimating that there's about 3 more segments of that coming, so it may be a good time to update your passwords, just by the way. The FBI actually announced in 2018 a report on educational technologies, worried about data collection and unsecured systems, so making sure that you don't have those. And then, of course, Microsoft Outlook or other ones. So every single system has had a breach, or if they haven't yet, they will at some point. So it's just good to keep in mind what you're storing where and who all has access to that. All right. So I want to make sure we have some conversation time. How are we looking on time?
Well, yeah, till 11:40, so.
Wonderful, we got plenty of time. All right, so I want you to have some time too for conversation because I've talked a lot. But we want to look at where to from here. So what kind of things are you guys wanting to do now that you have this information, or what further information do you guys want to get?
Is there any cases that happened here, and how bad was it? Like a student record get leaked out or something here at USC?
I wasn't able to find anything recently. I'm sure there are some ones. Now, are you talking about like a data breach or?
Yeah, data breach or student information got leaked, or anything kind of that happened here, and how bad was that for the university and for the faculty.
Nate, do you have any information on that? Do you know if there's been any data breaches here? I know there hasn't been anything, I don't believe, recently. I do know there has been some issues before, and there's also, so we're actually moving away because we still have, with professors and other people coming in, having to use social security numbers. So I don't know if you guys are all having to deal with that too. But the university is slowly, very slowly trying to move away from some of that just because of those safety issues and some of those other things that are happening. Because it's not just actually the students we have to worry about, we also have to worry about our own privacy and data security, right? So what are we storing? What do we have access to, or who has access to what of our information? So that's a great question. So yeah, there's not one that I've seen here. There have been a few universities that have had some problems. I know a few universities got attacked in those ransomware schemes where they were having their information held hostage until they paid money. That's also hit some police stations and some other areas, oddly enough, and hospitals, I think. So that's been something with the ransomware and the problems. Other than that, I don't think we've been hacked lately. Or at least if we have not maybe been told about it. And that does happen a lot, is you may not hear some of the stuff, because what happens is sometimes it'll just happen, if it's just in a small group, then they'll just work with those individual people. Try to figure that out. Or if it's something where maybe there's a data breach with a specific company, then again, they might try to work with the individuals. Companies don't like to advertise that they've had a breach, because then it's gonna be like, okay, here, trust me, please. But I mean, it's like we've seen, I mean, the Equifax has had those huge breaches. We've had every single component of our society has pretty much had a breach at some point recently. So, all right. Whatever, yes.
I want to go back for just a second to some comments you made about privacy policies.
Okay.
Right, so you talked about the kind of unreasonable and astronomical amount of time it would take to actually go through them and read them.
Yes.
And so I thought that was really interesting, but I thought it was also very interesting that you made a good point that reading does not necessarily equal understanding, right? And so the uphill battle with these things, beyond just reading them, if we can find that kind of time to read them, would be to understand like the jargon, the kind of technical terms that a lot of people don't necessarily have access to. So I was wondering if you knew of any resources that, you know, we as educators could use to educate ourselves about these things, or if we could, there's resources where we could use to kind of educate students to know like what a third-party site is, or what, you know, what it means when your data is being shared with these people, or you know, just like these terms or concepts.
Yeah, so there are some resources available, and I'd be happy to send out, if you want, I can collect emails at the end of the session, and if you want to give me those, I'd be happy to send those out. I didn't think to include them, I'm sorry.
I know.
But there are some ones, and the nice thing is there has actually been a push, because this is such a problem where it's 2,500 words, right? And if you're reading that and not able to understand even half of it, that's a problem. So there's actually been a big push trying to get privacy policies to be more understandable and legible. So some of them do now have kind of a brief summary, some of them have some other information, but that's something that has been deemed a huge issue, because again, most people you just scroll through and accept.
Right.
And because you don't have time and you don't have the inclination to read all of that. But there are some resources, and I'd be happy to go ahead and email those out. And another big issue with privacy policies too is they can change at will.
Right.
So this has been something else where most of the time they'll have that banner, but then they don't always tell it, and it's considered retroactive sometimes. So they could say, okay, well, as of right now, we're perfectly fine, but then in a week, we're going to be sharing all this information, and oh, now we're going to share it, and we're going to trademark anything that you've posted up here, or we're going to license it, or we might take those ideas. That's also been a big thing with image companies or other things like that. I want to say Snapchat has done some of that, and some other ones, where they say, we then have access to reuse your photos. So they could take the photos that you've taken, they could sell them, they could market them, they can all of a sudden place them on big ads saying depressed, feeling lonely, and then have a big picture of you there. So there's a lot of different things where that's something you want to be aware of.
Right. So like motivating people to like want to care about this is also part of the
Exactly, and it's hard sometimes, and so that's one of the things where I tell people is find something relatable. If you're trying to explain it to them, why should they care? So say, well, how would you like to have your email that you wrote thinking it was private, and now that's being shared? So it's the same thing we're seeing with all kinds of different other technology. I mean, they're having this, so one of the ones when it flashed through really quick is, this isn't necessarily with the program, but all the major carriers were actually sharing your live location with places. So they actually had bounty hunters and other things who were able to track people down live because they were given access to people's locations randomly. And so just being aware of what might be able to be offered. So it's one of those things, why should you care? Well, do you want someone randomly reading your emails? Do you want someone randomly able to just turn the camera on and videotape you and you don't know about it? And so even the technology that we're working with, so if we're having them borrow cell phones, if we're having them use laptops or other things like that, just being aware of what kind of things are inherently a part of those. Anyone else?
So for a privacy policy, if you deem it to be unreasonable, are there really any other options besides go find someone else to work with?
At the moment, not really. So it depends on how big of an entity you are. So if you're an individual, they're going to say, sorry, good luck, go somewhere else. Sometimes if it's something that you know at a university level or a state level or some other level, that's one of those things where you start telling people, hey, did you know this company is doing this or selling this or are making us agree to this? And sometimes you can then get it kicked up. It just depends on how big of a stink you can make. And so that's why most of the time when you're seeing these changes, they're not going to change because it's not in their best interest unless there's a big enough reason for them. So if enough people get annoyed or outraged about it, they're not going to do anything.
Yes, I have a question from online.
Okay.
Okay, the question is, as the instructor, what is our role in terms of privacy and security? Is it the educator's responsibility or the institution's?
I think it's both. I think ideally it should be the institution that should be looking at this. But at the same time, I mean, the privacy policies and the other things that I was able to find from the university was here, which is pretty much saying they're going to have their own ones. And then here, which was going to something from 2013 instead of the newer 2018. So I think ideally the university would have someone who's making sure that we're checking through these things and maybe giving a list out to professors of, hey, we've double-checked privacy policies. We've had our law team look at these. Here's the ones you should stay away from. Here's the ones maybe use with caution, and here are ones you shouldn't use at all. But with that not happening, except for, of course, Blackboard or some of those other ones, then I think instructors have to be reliant on themselves in many ways just to make sure that we're not sacrificing our rights to the students unnecessarily. Or at least maybe we give students the option. Say, we'd like to use these items, but we know that there are some possible issues with this, and then make sure that they're just aware of what it is.
That was going to be close to my question, actually. Like, what rights do students have to make decisions about these type of participations? Like, can a student say that they're choosing not to participate in certain types of technology because they're concerned about data? Like, I can't imagine if a student said they weren't going to participate in Blackboard. You know what I mean? But maybe some of the other, more conciliatory options.
So I don't think students know that they have any rights when it comes to any of this. So most of the time, students just assume that whatever the professor tells them is going to be okay. The number of times I've had any students who ever asked me, so I actually posed this. I teach an information literacy class. And I actually posed this and said, okay, well, I'm going to require all of you guys to do this, that, and the other. And they were just starting to write down the instructions. I was like, no, guys, you shouldn't be objecting to this. This is terrible. Because the one I was having them sign up for was a very bad site. But I was like, no, you should not just, but they trust us. And that's one of the things, too, that as professors, we need to make sure that we're not doing something wrong with that trust and that we're earning it by kind of looking at these things so they don't necessarily have to think of them. Or just letting them know you guys have rights. And that's another thing when it comes to FERPA is most people don't realize that when they reach a certain age, they're like, oh, well, that's only for people who are under a certain age. No, once they reach 18, they have the rights then instead of their parents. And so making sure that they know, hey, you're able to access your educational record if you want to. You're able to get this information. You're able to say, I have concerns about something. So yeah, most students, they don't realize that that's an option. So I haven't yet had one. I'd love to, actually. I'd love to have someone go, nope, I don't want to. And that's one of those ones where you try to think of alternative items. So I'm actually doing, in my class, I'm going to be having where they have to create PSA videos. And I'm having where I'm getting them 10 different options for how to turn it in almost. Just to make sure that if they want to, they can upload it. I mean, they can upload it on YouTube if they want, but I have other options available. So that way, whatever they are comfortable with, whatever they want to have as far as with an account or other things like that. And so just making sure that if possible, there's options, there's other things that we can do to make sure that we're not infringing on any rights. Well, and you guys already went. So do you guys have any other, do you have any other questions? Yeah. Oh, we have another question. All right. Or for those online, if I haven't answered something fully, please let me know, and I'll go ahead and answer a little more on it. Speak a little more on it, I should say. Sorry, I kind of tore through that first part. I was so excited to get to the discussion, but I want to make sure I covered everything. Are there any other resources, too, that you guys might like to have or that we think we should offer?
That list of like good, medium, bad would be nice as far as third parties.
Okay, so like kind of a pre-approved list.
Have you ever gone to the site Terms of Service Didn't Read? I think it's tosdr.org or something, and it basically like boils down terms of service and privacy policies to like a couple bullets, and it rates it from good to bad as far as how it treats your privacy. It's a pretty neat site.
Which one is that, Terms of Service?
Let me find it again. I don't want to say I don't want to
Sorry.
misquote it. Yeah. Yeah, it's tosdr.org. It stands for Terms of Service Didn't Read.
Well, and it's a huge problem because between the terms of service and the privacy policies and all the other agreements and things like that, you can get yourself in some real trouble.
Yes.
I think there was one person where they created an app, and then in the terms of service, they said, I can ask you for $1. And then they just randomly had an automated email send out what I'd like my $1. And they just did it as a kind of a thing just to say, just you need to be aware of this. But it's one of those, if you're agreeing to it, and most of the time too, there's legalities, and most lawyers would say, nah, it's not actually going to be doing that. But right. All right, we had a question from the.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I stepped in to get clarification on the question. So I think it was similar to what you were just talking about. So what can we as consumers / educators do when we have to agree to the agree portion, I think, of the privacy statement if we want to use the app / program or tools?
All right, so there's the choice of we can not use it, or we can choose not to work with it, and we can click don't agree, in which case you won't be able to access it. The other thing that you can do is you can click agree, and then just be cognizant of what you're using. The other thing, what you want to look at is, especially if it's an app or something else that will be downloaded or live on your computer, if you're not trusting it, if you're not 100% agreeing with it, please, it's better to not download it. They've had ones lately where apps have been found to secretly been recording your screens. There's been all kinds of other issues, and so you can do some real damage if it's something you're downloading on your computer and you don't 100% agree with it. You don't know what else might be coming with it. Especially with updates or other things like that, and with it changing at any moment's time, that's just something, if you don't trust it, if you don't agree with that, hate to say it, just don't use it. And I know there's sometimes when that may not be possible because you have to use it for something, but just maybe try to corral it as much as possible in one area. There's some things you can do on your computer to set up drives or some other systems or some things like that where you could still access it, but carefully, or just use it only on school computers. So that way you can go ahead and not have it maybe on your own personal devices. So there's a few things you can do, but unfortunately we're at a point now where it's mostly going to be you don't use it or you agree to whatever their terms are. So I hope that answers your question. Well, as was mentioned, I'm going to be having this available. So there's a tiny URL, which I believe is being sent out. Oh, I think we've got another question. So there's a tiny URL which is being sent out. And if you guys want to write down your emails, I would be happy to then send out that resource list for some different methods for reading privacy policies and for examining some of that.
Question.
Yes.
By any chance of students hacking into a professor or other students' account, does that happen here?
I'm sorry?
One student accessing other students' records.
Another student's record?
Yeah.
I'm not going to know about that. Most of the time that would be handled normally within either the department or I think there's a specific office that's going to handle some of those. I don't think, again, they normally publicize that. So the question was if one person was able to access, so one student was able to access another student's records.
Yeah.
There might have been an instance, I know that's one of the reasons why they say you should always make sure you're logging out of Blackboard or doing some other things for safety reasons. Don't save your passwords in certain places, just to make sure that no one can access those confidential records. But if there has been an instance of that, then I'm unaware of it. Although it's very possible between hacking or other programs that there have been some programs sometimes where it accidentally gave everyone's username and password list to people. There have been all kinds of problems either between the software itself or someone was hacked or something else happened. And so that's just one of those things where unfortunately they don't normally publicize about that. So.
Okay, another question from our online community. What on-campus resources or officials can I go to or utilize if I have further questions about this topic?
Well, you can always contact me. I'm not necessarily, again, an official for the university. Other than that, I would contact possibly it's BTS, the Department of Information. They would probably be a good one to contact. And I know that we do have a legal team, although I'm not sure as far as who would be the person to contact for that. But I would say the Information Technology Services would probably be a good place to start. And for anyone who's watching, if you want to send me your emails or have them write down, then I'm sure that they'll pass those on to me, so I'll send those resource lists to you as well. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I hope this was beneficial for you. But if nothing else, too, again, we just need to make sure that we are taking our position of responsibility seriously, and that we're just starting to think about what things, because unfortunately our lawmakers are really far behind on the curve on these things. The university, again, is just so big that sometimes there's just not enough people to be doing everything. So sometimes it's just going to rest on us to make sure that we're thinking about these things and that we start to maybe talk to some other people and see what other people are thinking about, or maybe they don't know about this either. And so just starting the educational aspect of it you can always go from the ground up, right? So if we get enough of us together talking about how these are concerns and how there's some issues, then hopefully we can get some more people involved. All right, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.